Hola, SAP developers. Welcome to today's last session, part of the TOEFL 2025 integration track. Before we start, please feel free to drop us your questions in the chat window as we will be monitoring it, and we will answer some of your questions there and some of your questions live. Today, we have Yanis and Vinayak, who are part of the product management team for SAP Integration Suite, focusing on Edge Integration Cell. So if you have any questions regarding how you can run your integrations in the cloud and on premises seamlessly, these are the guys who you can ask your questions, okay? So without any further delay, hola Vinayak, Yanis, over to you guys.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that introduction, Antonio. Happy to be here, and today we'll be talking about unleashing next generation hybrid integration with Edge Integration Cell. As Antonio introduced, I'm Vinay Katkoli, and I'm joined here with my colleague Yanis, and we're both product managers from the SAP Integration Suite area, and we'll essentially be kicking things today with Edge Integration Cell. So without further ado, Yanis, why don't you just start with our presentation?
Sure, thanks, Vinayak. Yeah, welcome also from my side. And yeah, let's have a look at the agenda for today, what we have planned. So we'll start with an overview. What is Edge Integration all about? When you should use it? Why you should use it? And then we'll have a look at the high-level architecture. What are the components? And then go into the run and operate of these integrations, how this works, what you have to do as a developer, and also how you can, of course, also monitor then and operate Edge integration. So then we have a nice live demo as well from Vinayak, and then we end up giving you an update about the recent innovations and also about the features that are planned. So let's get started with the overview. So we're talking about Edge Integration Cell, and Edge Integration Cell is part of SAP Integration Suite, right? And SAP Integration Suite you can use for all kinds of things, right? It's an integration platform as a service. You can connect to SAP apps, third-party apps, B2B trading partners, governments, and also AI agents. And I think it's too much to go into each and every detail of the capabilities, and therefore we also have the other sessions. And today is really about the runtimes, right? And before we only had a cloud runtime, and this cloud runtime is maintained and provided by SAP. So we take care of all the updates, we take care of all the infrastructure. You, have a customer, don't have to worry, right? You just can use it out of the box. And especially, right, with the PIPO modernization as well, customers have the need to also deploy integrations in their own private landscapes. And therefore, we released an Edge Integration Cell. And that's then also the focus of the session today, so that you have then the overall picture, that you know an Edge Integration Cell is then an additional runtime of Integration Suite. So you always get the cloud runtime, and you have then the option to use Edge Integration Cell in case it makes sense, right? So let's have a look into the why, right? Why it is important and when you should use it. So Edge Integration Cell is a hybrid solution. So you still have a dependency to the cloud, but the runtime is all in your private landscape. And we see it especially that customers have right on-premise to on-premise integration scenarios. Or they want really integration scenarios to be processed in their private landscape. There can be some compliance, there can be some rules they have to follow, right? Security guidelines. And if you're not allowed to process data in the cloud, right, you could use Edge Integration Cell to keep really all the sensitive data also within your private landscape. And of course, if it's on-premise to on-premise integration, it maybe doesn't make sense also due to latency and so on to go via the cloud. And then Edge Integration Cell could be the way to go. Before, in the cloud world, right, SAP provided everything. Now with Edge Integration Cell, if you deploy it in your own landscape, it also comes with some kind of responsibility, right? Because you have a customer now have to provide a Kubernetes cluster. You see it here. We have certain container applications platforms that we support. So for example, you can deploy it on Microsoft AKS, Amazon, Google, or also Red Hat OpenShift and SUSE Ranger can be deployed on the hyperscalers, right, in the private cloud, but also on-premise in your own data center. And how does it all work together? So you as a customer provide then the cluster. You provide also the database. At the moment, it's a Postgres and Redis database that is required. And with the next release of Edge Integration Cell, we will also support then SAP HANA as an additional database that replaces then both Postgres and Redis. We'll also come to that later then in the roadmap items. And in the end, it's not, so it's still a hybrid product. So you would develop your integration scenarios in the cloud. You would design them there. At the moment, also the monitoring is in the cloud. We plan to enable offline monitoring as well. And the whole operations also is in the cloud regarding the updates that you have to do. So there are monthly updates that you have to perform. And that also is done via the Edge Lifecycle Management cockpit in the cloud. More to that later also in the high-level architecture. And in the end, the flows that you already have modeled also with cloud integration, they are compatible as well with Edge Integration Cells. There are certain restrictions, but mostly they are compatible. And then you can deploy them onto your Edge Integration Cell runtime and run these scenarios locally. And one integration suite tenant. From there, you can operate multiple Edge Integration Cell nodes. So for example, if you have multiple production facilities, you could have one Edge Integration Cell instance in each production facility, and then deploy or handle that via one central integration suite tenant. We expect a constant internet connection so that Edge Integration Cell is always connected to your integration suite. As mentioned, it's a hybrid product. But we also have a roadmap item for this. We will support up to 48 hours offline mode. So also if you're not connected to the internet for 48 hours, your integrations will still execute, but there can be, or there are some limitations. So for example, you cannot deploy any new integration flows. And by default, we expect that the internet connection is always there, and it's then only for temporary connectivity loss where we support then up to 48 hours. All right. That's it for the high-level overview. Let's have a short look how the licensing looks like. Good news is if you have Integration Suite Standard or Premium Edition, then Edge Integration Cell is already included in your license. So you would be ready to use that without any additional license costs. So you then have your for each cloud tenant that you have then the entitlement for one Edge Integration Cell. And if you need more Edge Integration Cell entitlements, there's then an additional SKU where you then can buy additional Edge Integration Cell entitlements. And there's also change on the metrics. So we have a fixed price, right, for Integration Suite, and we also have a message-based metrics. And these message-based metric is calculated the same as we have on the cloud. But in the end, only 50% of the messages that are processed are then also charged because you as a customer have to provide the whole infrastructure, right? This is why we have there this kind of discount from a license perspective. But of course, you as a customer have to provide then also all the infrastructure that also comes with a certain cost. That's it for the licensing model. And I also want to quickly introduce the personas and the tasks that we have before I then hand over to Vinayak. So we have one additional role that comes with Edge Integration Cell, or one additional persona, and this is the system admin. Because as mentioned before, SAP took care of all of that infrastructure. Now, if you deploy it in your own landscape, you need a system admin that then provisions the Kubernetes cluster, manages the resources, also performs the Kubernetes updates. So this is then a new role that is then added and can also be some new know-how, right? Or maybe different department that you have to involve here. Then we have the tenant admin. So that already existed in the past, the tenant admin of your Integration Suite tenant. And the tenant admin has some additional tasks. So he has to activate Edge Integration Cell. He also manages the roles. So who has access to the Edge Lifecycle Management Cockpit, then deploys the solution, does the monitoring, and also manages the monthly upgrades of Edge Integration Cell, because each month we ship a new version of Integration Suite in the cloud. And also for Edge Integration Cell, there's then a new version. And also you as a customer then have to apply these updates on a monthly basis. Because we always support the current version and one version before. If you are on an older version, then we will restrict certain functions. So then also you as a customer have to perform then these monthly upgrades. But you can do that with a click of a button then on the Edge Lifecycle Management Cockpit, and they are also applied with near zero downtime. Then we have integration developers. For them, not much changes. They still design and develop the APIs and in the cloud, and then can also monitor it there and debug it there. And of course, we also have the end users that then invoke all the endpoints. And with that, I think it would be good to hand over to Vinayak, that also he will then also explain how these roles work together with our high-level architecture. So Vinayak, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Next slide, please, Yanis. Yeah, so as Yanis alluded to, right? So we have two pieces as part of this hybrid architecture. We have the pieces on cloud, and then we have the pieces that are installed in your on-prem database at the on-prem location at the bottom, right? So if you look at the way how they act in harmony, so the process really begins, with the controller or a component. You can call this a control plane. So we call this the Edge Lifecycle Management, which is really responsible for getting the container images from what we call as the repository-based shipment channel from SAP, right? So we move our container images into your own registry, right? And you see that there is it's an optional component, right? So many customers would want to operate and onboard their own local container registries, for example, JFrog, or it could be something else, right? So the idea is that the images are always locally available for you. And you could do things like run your own virus scans and stuff like that. So that's really what the local container registry does. And the Edge Lifecycle Management Service piece at the bottom, this is really the heart and soul of what's really happening. So as you can see, it actually internally will leverage Cloud Connector as a mechanism to create a secure tunnel between the cloud pieces and then your on-prem pieces, right? So of course, this is not to be confused with your instance of Cloud Connector, right? So this is, at this point of time, it's an internal component that's actually leveraged. And then we have the Edge Integration Cell itself, right? Which is on a very high level can be decomposed into a policy engine, a worker pod, and messaging service. The policy engine, as you can imagine, essentially is the first point of access, and we have capabilities like being able to authenticate and authorize your calls, being able to check for things like quota management, which is exactly what you see on API management. And the worker is classically the mediation piece. So customers familiar with CPI essentially know that worker is what we colloquially called the CPI runtime. So that's the big piece. And the messaging services are components by which we instrument asynchronous integrations, right? So things like the JMS adapter is enforced by the messaging service. So that's the way how the components really play out. And what you can also see on the extreme left are certain databases, right? So it is recommended that customers bring and onboard their own databases for Postgres and Redis, right? And this is to ensure that objects that need persistency and state actually can be retained in them, right? So that's really the architecture. And of course, like Anis said, the integration development happens essentially on cloud, and then customers also get to operate and then manage the entire life cycle of actually what's happening using the operations cockpit. And as you can imagine, then we have message monitoring, the MPL logs, which is your single point of entry to really see the gauge the operatives of whether a message was successfully executed or not. We also have a system level monitoring. It's an optional component again. So customers who want a Fluentd and Grafana based let's say canvas to operate their Kubernetes controls can leverage that. So that's a totally optional component. So this is how the components break down. What I want to do next is to overlay this with the personas that Yanis mentioned, right? So if you think in terms of the system admin persona, and here is where what we hear from customers is that there are a lot of security approvals needed, right? And setting up the Kubernetes itself is a big part of this, the responsibilities of the system admin, right? So onboarding databases, ensuring that the local container registry is up and ready, and setting up the Kubernetes itself is the responsibility of a system admin, closely operated with your security controllers, right? So that's the first life cycle. And Yanis, if you can click next, please. And then the tenant admin, of course, he is the one who instruments the bootstrapping of the Kubernetes controls, ensuring that the solutions are deployed, right? So he's the one who's operating on our BTP cockpit, essentially to install the pieces. And as you can see, at the end of it, the installation is done and all the parts and services on Edge Integration Cell are instrumented. So that's the responsibility of the tenant admin. Next click, please. And the integration developer obviously doesn't have to know anything about this. The integration and API developer just goes on and models and builds integration flows and APIs as he or she would. And then obviously gauge the operations and monitors the messages using, again, standard consoles that we have built on Integration Suite, right? So there is absolutely no new learning for an API or an integration developer. And next click, please. And as we mentioned, we expect that the end users then directly invoke the ingress data points into the policy engine, and thereby any integration that needs to connect to preferably an on-prem system or even a cloud system then can actually be executed and delegated, right? So that's the way how the runtime and the design time operations actually pan out. Next click, please. And what we want to present over here very quickly is basically an overlay of how some of the underlying networking topology works, because we hear this from customers a lot. So as you can see, if you go via the numbering that I have, right? So the process starts by instantiating a private IP, right? Which is actually a load balancer on Istio, which acts as the ingress gateway for us. And then what essentially what you as a customer would do is to then go and create a key store where a CA-signed certificate needs to be onboarded, right? And we need the CA-signed certificate with the private key for SSL termination. So this is something that you would create on your key store, and then we ensure that from the key store, it is actually replicated into the edge pods, right? And then what we also need is basically for you to have a private DNS control, right? Because for example, if you're running this in AWS, or if you're running this in Azure, right? So you have nice controls like the private DNS zone, you have Route 53s, where essentially you are setting up DNS management. And the DNS management needs to go hand in hand with the fact that you also need to have some kind of a private connectivity, a line of sight, right? And that's where, again, services like VPC or VNet peering, private links, and those kind of technologies that usually hyperscalers have come into existence. And eventually what we want is that when the client makes a call, there is a line of sight, right? So the network connectivity ensures that the client is able to then, via the private DNS, able to connect into the private IP, and the network paths are all laid out for him or her, right? So this is the way how the networking path actually pans out. So yeah, that's it from my side. Yanis, why don't you take us through run and operate integration steps?
Yeah, thanks, Vinayak, for the great explanation. So I will now give you a short introduction. You will also see it later, some stuff in the demo from Vinayak. And let me first start with a API or integration flow developer, right? How does it work? So as mentioned, you use, as you're doing it today, right? You use the Integration Studio in the cloud, you develop here your integration flow, And at the end, you can then select where you want to deploy the integration flow. So you can deploy it on the cloud runtime, you can deploy it on one of the edge nodes, you can also deploy it to multiple runtimes. As mentioned, we have a compatibility, so they are using the same, using Apache Camel underneath, right? And there we have then one restrictions nodes still, because some features are not yet available on Edge Integration Cell, for example, the partner directory, right? So if you want to use the partner directory at the moment, it's not available. It's then planned next year in Q1. So this would be one example of the restrictions that we have. And you would also, when you want to deploy something and it's not compatible, you will also see then a message and you will not be able to deploy the content. Important to mention that some adapters, right, will also exclusively be released on Edge Integration Cell. So one example that we released is the RFC sender adapter. So the RFC sender adapter is then for technical reasons, right, only available on Edge Integration Cell. We also have further adapters. We have the file adapter waiting. It will come then in Q1 next year, most likely. That will also only be released then first on Edge Integration Cell. Also, same goes with the OFDP adapter. So you see, even Edge Integration Cell can then have more features than cloud integration due to this additional adapters. When you want to design API artifacts, that is then a new feature that we have. So in the past, we had these two capabilities rather separated. You will also see that then in the demo later on with Vinayak, we introduced here a new designer where you now can combine integration flow steps with API policies. And this makes it then easier, instead of having two more or less rather disconnected components, having then really one integrated modeler and bringing then this together. Also at the moment only available on Edge Integration Cell. Then we have the monitoring part. I mentioned right now we just have a cloud monitoring. We have it on the roadmap. I will go to that later, that we also enable then an offline monitoring for our customers. But at the moment, right, you just have the cloud monitor, and there can then select here in the integration suite the runtimes if you want to monitor cloud or Edge Integration Cell, and there you can monitor all the messages, and also you can manage there your security material and deploy it from the cloud then either to your cloud runtime or to your Edge runtime. The data is stored on your tenant, right? So we don't store the data in the cloud. It's really stored then on your tenant, but you use in the cloud to define the data, or, for example, view then the monitoring data. Then we have the operations cockpit. In this operations cockpit, you can then maintain and monitor the system configurations, for example, the log level, right, of a certain component. You can define your system jobs. So, for example, the cleanup of the MPLs, right, in the cloud, we have there 30 days by default. On Edge, you can then also configure this in this operations cockpit. And you can also run then diagnostic tasks from here for troubleshooting, for example, also for the RFC adapter. There we have then diagnostic tasks, so you can get then more information in case something goes wrong. And last but not least, we have the Edge lifecycle management, as mentioned, for the lifecycle of your Edge nodes. Here you can trigger the monthly updates. You can perform that by just pressing then a button. You can then upgrade your solution, and you also have then from there access to these Grafana dashboards for the system level monitoring to then monitor your resources. And I would say with this enough slides, let's have a look how this works in the system. So I would hand over to you, Vinayak, again for the demo.
Yeah, sure. If you can go next, please. I'll set the demo context.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully demo gods are with me. It's always a tricky thing. So we have two demos today planned out, right? So my first demonstration is really going to be on the context of EIC as an enabler for your move from SAP PI to Integration Suite. And that's really what our customers are after, right? And also, as Janis mentioned, that's really the big ticket, right? So we actually wanted to demonstrate EIC in that context. So as you can see, again, based on the numbering, so what we have is SAP process integration, right? So we'll be looking at classically how things are laid out. So we have an integration directory and enterprise service builder for your metadata. And I have a very simple SOAP to SOAP demonstration, right, where a sending system will be invoking a SOAP message, and the SOAP protocol will then be used to talk to an on-prem S/4HANA system, right? And then I have a credit management SOA service to do this talking. And as we then establish this very simple iFlow, then we jump across to SAP Integration Suite, right? Where I'm sure you've heard about a capability called migration assessment. And migration assessment is one of our capabilities that helps customers assess and then put a fitment of how easily can they move their interfaces to Integration Suite. And after looking and evaluating the results of the migration assessment, then we'll actually do the migration, which is the meatier part of this demo. And the migration, as you can see, will then seamlessly deploy the needed artifacts and mappings into the EIC runtime, which again is located in the customer's on-prem environment, right? So process integration, S/4HANA, EIC, all happens to be on-prem. And in this case now, the sending system, instead of sending a message to PI, we'll actually send a message to EIC runtime, and then we'll enable the same SOAP to SOAP protocol and exchange via EIC runtime, and then we'll invoke the same credit management service, right? So this is my demo scenario. And let me now start sharing. Okay, so there we are. So the first thing I wanted to demonstrate real quick is so this is a VM that is running my SAP PI, right? And then I have a credit management account, integration content. And as you can see, this is a very simple SOAP to SOAP. It's got a sender SOAP channel, and on the outbound side, it's again got a receiver SOAP, which is essentially just talking to an HTTP enabled S/4HANA system, right? So VHCAL is my S/4HANA system using simple basic authentication, right? And it will get back the credit management information. So that's what the integration configuration object does. And then we obviously have a lot of mappings. Again, standard PI paradigm. So what you see over here is that to enable my objects, I have message mappings, I have message types, I have data types, I have service interfaces, right? So we'll be showing everything in action as part of this migration journey. So again, nothing new for seasoned, PI experts like yourself. I'm pretty sure this resonates. And let's invoke a message just to see that this actually works. So I'm into my SOAP UI, and as you can see, I'm calling my process integration runtime, and I have my sample, SOAP body, which is essentially passing in a data ID and a segment ID. And what you should see is results from my S/4HANA, and what it's actually telling is that, hey, this customer absolutely has no credit limit, right? So think of this as a credit worthiness check service, right? Which actually tells whether this is a worthy customer or not. And in this case, I see that he doesn't have any credit limit. So this was my opening scenario. And like I said, what I'm going to now very quickly flash on my screen is my S/4HANA, right? And as you can see, I have a credit management service here on ESR SOA that I've enabled, which is set up for basic authentication and client certificates. So that's my service. So let's head into Integration Suite, right? So now we are in Integration Suite. And like I mentioned, the first thing I want to kick the tires with is to assess the PI system via this migration assessment service. So I'm not going to be doing this here because it takes some time. But as you can see, I'm connected to my PI system called JO1. And via Cloud Connector, you see that there is a successful transport, right? Which means that Integration Suite is able to connect to PI for the assessment itself. And I've created here data extractions. It usually takes some time, but essentially what this is that it gets a dump of everything that is to be transported from PI, right? So things like communication channels, you have your mappings, your XSLTs. So everything has been downloaded, right, as part of this data extraction. So that's essentially what you do. And if I can just pull this out. close. And the second thing that you would do is to then evaluate the scenario, right? So the scenario evaluation is again working on top of the data set, and it gives you a fitment of, hey, is your system good? Do you have interfaces ready to migrate? Do they need adjustments, right? So just think of this as a report that really tells you whether how good you are to kick off the migration journey, right? So I'm not going to be running this; it's already run. But then you see that this is a good report. So I definitely have a lot of content that I can immediately start migrating, which is exactly what we will be doing next. So I head back to my design tab. So let's go to my package called Devtoberfest. Hit edit, and I have my artifacts tab, and you see that there is this button right up center called migrate. So let's click on migrate. And I'm going to pull out my J01 system that we just established. And next, sorry, I just have to shuffle my screen a little because there is, okay, that's better. And I'm going to look for all the ICOs in the system, right? So as you can see, there is already a dump that was prepared. So if I filter on my credit management account read, let me select that. Next, and the system is going to basically assign a pattern, right? And it's just telling that this is standard content, and then just the standard migration approach should work. Let's next, and the system has identified that there are certain message mappings that that are ready for import. So let's actually also create them in the same package. I could have reused them if I had created them already, but in this case, since I don't, so I'm just going to create them from scratch. And next step, the system is going to then finally present a summary of things that it will actually create on your behalf. Let's go ahead and let's give this a name. That is already copied here. So I'm going to say Devtoberfest, credit management check, review, and migrate. And this probably takes some time depending on the complexity of your interface. In this case, it was rather simple, so the system actually completed. And as you can see, I have a bunch of artifacts that actually show up, right? So I have my integration flows, and then I also have my data types, message mappings, message types, exactly the way how you saw this on PI system. So let's quickly review our integration flow. Okay, that was not the one. This is the one, sorry. So the integration flow, as you can see, essentially also layers a SOAP sender adapter and a SOAP receiver adapter, and you have a bunch of local integration processes that actually performs the mapping, just the way how you would do this on the PI side. And I need to do a couple of changes here. And the first change I'm going to be doing is to actually click on my SOAP receiver adapter. And what you see the system needs to be elevated to is HTTPS, right? Because remember, I had HTTP. So it's always good to have HTTPS when you're performing this in Integration Suite. So I'm going to elevate the security level of this. And the other thing I'm going to do is to obviously call out my credential name, right? So basic authentication credential. So I already have a security material created that I'm just going to copy and put it here. And okay, and that should be all, right? So my content is now ready to deploy. So I'm going to hit the deploy button. And as you can see, we have now the standard cloud integration runtime as well as multiple edge nodes, right? So I have two edge nodes over here. I'm going to select my secondary node, click on yes, and that should essentially trigger the deployment. Usually takes about 30 seconds, and usually, okay, deployment is done and the runtime status is started. Now, before I can execute this, I need to do a couple of other things. I also would need to deploy my message mapping step as well, right? So I have these two message mapping interfaces. So let me go and deploy this one by one. So this is the message mapping for my request object, and here is the message mapping for my response object. And probably it's going to take, again, 30 seconds. Yeah, deployment is done. So let's go and inspect. And again, as Yanis mentioned, we have multiple views of the monitoring dashboard. In this case, I'm going to look up the monitoring dashboard for edge integration, my secondary node. And what you see here is that I have, so the message mapping still is in a started state. Usually it takes about 30 seconds for this to start. But then as you can see, my integration flow is already started and ready, right? So let's just wait for maybe a few minutes for this to start. Then actually I'll show you the actual invocation. So while we wait on this, and I'm going to execute this right before I end my call, I'll switch context and then take you through my second scenario, right, which is what we call as the API artifact. Right now, the API artifact is a brand new concept that we've introduced, as Yanis said, essentially now on Edge Integration Cell. And what the API artifact does is that it's sort of a adaptation of your classical integration flow, but just that it's tailored for API invocations, right? So you name SOAP, REST, right? OData. So it's tailored for these protocols, and the API artifact, pretty much packs in some of the capabilities that we have as part of classical API management, right? So things like being able to authenticate, authorize a call, able to validate the schema of an input, let's say with an XSD. So we have rate limiting, right? So there are multiple capabilities that are again part of what an API artifact does. And a recent enhancement is the introduction of what we call as an API direct adapter, which is very similar to a process direct adapter, just that it enables the reuse of APIs, right? And you may recall, if you're an API management user, we have a limitation in that we cannot really reuse APIs. So we have shared flows, but then shared flows are kind of limited. So the API direct adapter is kind of hits the spot where you are able to create these reuse entities and then use them across your integration flows, in this case, API artifacts, right? So the scenario is that the API direct adapter will perform the credit management lookup using the SOA service I described. And once it does the lookup for a data ID, it gets a business partner ID, right? And once the business partner ID is there, then it's going to invoke the business partner service from S/4HANA again, and then eventually present back the response, right? So we are doing an aggregation over here. We're doing a mashup by involving two separate calls and thereby showing the API direct adapter, right? That's my scenario. Meanwhile, let me go and check if my mappings are also deployed. Yes, you see that that's also deployed. Excellent. So let's do a quick demonstration of this. So bringing up my Bruno console. Before that, I'll have to copy my. Okay, so let's go back to started, and we have leftover fest. I'm going to copy the endpoint. Head over to my Bruno console, and I'm going to put this, right? So this is my endpoint from Integration Suite, and you see that I'm calling the leftover fest credit management check endpoint, and I'm going to make the same post that I did on my SOAP UI. And lo and behold, we essentially see that we get back a response. And in this case, it was a local connection. You may recall that we're not going via cloud connector. So the connection from Edge Integration Cell to my S/4HANA system is actually using the local line of sight, and it doesn't involve cloud connector. So that's pretty much what we have over here. So that ends my first demonstration. And now let's back to the API artifact that I mentioned. So once I refresh my screen, so let's bring up my API artifact, right? So I have this API artifact over here called credit and business partner fetch for debtor party. And again, it looks very similar to how you would model an API endpoint using API management, right? So there is the target endpoint, and then there is, now we have all these resources. And because this was pulled from an OData service, you see that it also has now the capability to have an open API specification where you can look at resources operations, and you can look at the Swagger schema, right? Interact with your service. So we've actually blended that capability into the API artifact. So that's one. And then we have the policies tab, as Yanis mentioned. It's fusing together the ecosystems of what you do via policies and what you do via mediation, right? So this is my API artifact, and as you can see, it has an HTTP sender. And like I said, I have now this API direct adapter, and the API direct adapter is what then communicates with my call to get the credit management information, right? So you see that it's actually a local call to the API direct that I'll show in a minute. And once it gets back the response, then it's essentially just making a call to my S4HANA system, which is an HTTP call. And as you can see, the target endpoint in this case is my local S4HANA instance, right? So let's run this. Before I run this, I wanted to show you how the reuse API or the API direct adapter looks. And for that, I'm going to bring up my check credit management API, which is basically a reuse. And as you can see on the sender side, it quantifies itself as an API direct adapter, right? And as you can see, what I have is, again, I'm making a call to my SOAP endpoint, and eventually I'll just be logging the response that I get from my log, from my SOAP, right? So this is what is localized as its own container as an API direct. And yeah, let's execute this to see if everything falls in place. So this is my endpoint, right? So this is my endpoint where I'm calling the credit and business partner fetch for debtor party. So it's a post, and I have now my same post, my payload, and let's execute this. And what you should see is that it comes back now with the business partner details, right? For this particular business ID that the system pulled out. So you see that this is a successful call. And let's head over to monitoring to see what really happened there. And if I bring up my secondary node, you see that we did 3 messages, all in completed state. And this is my API direct adapter, right? And you see that now I have specifically printed the payload that actually comes back as part of my SOAP request. And as you can see, it's an attachment. I get my credit management information, but it's also annotated with the customer ID, right? And this customer ID is the one that then eventually is queried to get the business partner information for this customer ID. So that was the demonstration. Yeah, hopefully that should create a good impression. Yanis, back to you for the next section.
Sure. Thanks, Vinayak, for the great demo.
We can say that the demo gods are on your side today.
Yeah.
Yes, they were.
Yeah, everything worked out. Great to see. Yeah. Let me continue then with the recent innovations and also the roadmap. As mentioned, we support the newer Kubernetes versions. We also have their release calendar. The recent release was then that we support Kubernetes also in version 1.32. I mentioned the offline mode, right, that we have, and there also we have multiple increments where we will then ship this. The first increment that we have enabled is then that we have local client certificate authentication. So you can do client certificate authentication and offline authentication. For OAuth authentication or basic authentication, we still have at the moment a dependency that you need an internet connection, but there we are also working on this, that we also get this enabled fully offline. Then for the lifecycle management, we also have now an option that you can download the images before you really deploy them to your local registry. And then you can conduct the scan of these images using your own tooling. So that's also feedback that we got from customers, that they would like to scan the images before they really apply them. And this option, this is now as well possible. Then in the recent innovations I mentioned for integration flows and APIs, we have the RFC sender adapter and also receiver adapter now enabled. You saw there in the demo how to use the API direct adapter, right? And we also have done further improvements, like, for example, the support for access policies. Yeah, so that's it for the recent automations. Let's maybe look at what's planned for the roadmap. And there I want to highlight two major releases that are about to come. So one, I think, big topic lots of customers are waiting for is that we also support then HANA as a database for Edge Integration Cell. So right now you need Redis and Postgres. And with this increment that's around the corner, so will soon be shipped, you will then be able to use HANA as a single database instead of Redis and Postgres. We then plan to first support then it with HANA version 2 and service pack SO7 higher. And you also will be able to use then one HANA DB installation with multiple edge nodes. And as mentioned, this the release is then planned for Q4, then with the next release. Then another topic is the shared cluster support. So at the moment, you need cluster admin privileges. And there as well, the feedback that we got is that customers want to run Edge Integration Cell alongside other applications in the same cluster. And therefore, cluster admin privileges would are not the best way to do this. So you want to have there a more secure and isolated installation option with fewer required privileges, so that you then easily can run Edge Integration Cell also in your existing cluster, so that you don't need a dedicated cluster for Edge Integration Cell. Instead, reuse your existing clusters that you have. And this is then also planned for Q4. And there's then another increment that we also want to do is that you will be able to install multiple Edge Integration Cell instances within the same cluster. This is then planned in Q3 26 at the moment. Yeah, so these are then, I think, two features that really lots of customers are waiting for. That's why I highlighted them. We also have some more stuff on our roadmap. You can, of course, also check the roadmap explorer. I also attached there a link. So what we plan to release, also one, the file adapter, right? One also long-awaited adapters by our customers with NFS. This is then planned for Q1 next year. There we had a shift from Q4. It was originally planned. It's now shifted to Q1 next year. We have also the OFDP adapter and also generic JDBC adapter on our roadmap for Edge Integration Cell. Then for the offline mode, I mentioned the moment you monitor it in the cloud, and we also want to enable then an offline monitoring, so that if you don't have internet connection, you still can monitor. The first increment will be that we enable then local APIs, so that you can build your own monitoring dashboards using then the monitoring APIs that we have. And these are not yet enabled for Edge Integration Cell. This will then also come, that you can then use these monitoring and operation APIs and then build your own monitoring. We also plan to have then an offline monitoring with focused run also beginning of next year then available. Another feature is that if you as a customer have the requirement that monitoring data is only to be allowed on premise, so that you not even view the data in the cloud, therefore we also want to enable then that you can disable the message payload access from the cloud, so that the monitoring data really stays within Edge Integration Cell, and you also cannot view it in the cloud. It's then another feature that we also want to enable. And then as well, this 48-hour offline mode, also something that we then plan to support this year, alongside then also these offline authentication for OAuth and basic authentication. Then we have, I mentioned it before, the partner directory that we plan to support. That's then also important, for example, the pipeline concept, right? If you want to use this, there also the partner directory would be a prerequisite. The same goes for B2B scenarios. There we have trading partner management and integration advisor. Also, this then on the roadmap for next year, and also principal propagation support will be enabled. And yeah, I mentioned here on the roadmap already this shared cluster and multiple edge integration cells in one cluster, and also HANA database. In addition, we also will support the Valkey database instead of Redis. So if you don't want to use Redis, you can then use Valkey instead. And Vinayak showed you in the high-level architecture that we have an inbuilt cloud connector, and there we will as well enable that customer can use then an external cloud connector instead of the inbuilt cloud connector. All right, that would be the roadmap updates. We also have some links here that you can check out. We also have a learning journey that we recently released with deploying Edge Integration Cell on SUSE Venture or Red Hat OpenShift. We have some reference architecture if you want to deploy Edge Integration Cells on the hyperscalers like Azure, Google or Amazon, right? That's also something that you can check out. And there's also a YouTube playlist how to install then Edge Integration Cell. So feel free to check this out if you need then further information. Yeah, and with that, we're at the end of the session. So thank you all for watching, and have a nice day.
Well, thank you very much to both of you, Vinayak and Janice. We don't have any questions on the chat, unfortunately. So it's very exciting to see like all the things that are coming in Edge Integration Cell, right? It's not something that was released and it hasn't changed. It's actually that's constantly evolving and lots of new things are coming for it. So that's very cool. And you know, you mentioned support for Valkey. I remember when there was that announcement of the fork of Redis, right? Late last year sometime, and I wondered like which one will be the first SAP service that will end up adopting it or something like that. And at least the first one that I know of is Edge Integration Cell. So it's quite cool to see that that the team is also looking at what's happening in the market, obviously, and adapting, right? Obviously, it's into a market as well when you are adopting or implementing, for example, HANA as a database, right? So because customers obviously that have an on-premise presence might already have a HANA there, so why not just use your own HANA database instead of the Postgres that you have there? So that's pretty cool. So that's good to.
So we also happy for feedback, right? So also if you as a customer have any improvement requests, right, just feel free to reach out, and then we see that we get it implemented. And we also have, of course, our influence channel, right, where you can then also submit new feature requests and also vote for existing feature requests.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you both for sharing your knowledge and expertise as part of this session. I also want to thank the viewers for joining the session, and for those that will end up watching the recordings, thank you for making it this far as well. I hope you find it useful. Yeah, and I just want to remind everyone that the Tour Fest is still going on for a couple of weeks. There's a lot of content available for you, independent of the topic that you're interested in. It's not just integration, but there's also CAP, RAP, databases, AI, machine learning, MCP, whatever it is, that's happening in the SAP development world. You'll be able to find a session for you. So keep an eye. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Cool. So I've